We're going to be talking about the flood tonight, and rather than trying to spend a lot of time talking about scientific things that are really kind of outside my realm of understanding, we're going to spend time talking about Noah, but I want to give you some reference material if you're interested in finding more information. There is a new book that's been published, and this is from the Ark Encounter in Williamstown, Kentucky. They built the Ark to specifications there. There's also a creation museum that is connected to that exhibit. But they have a new book out called A Flood of Evidence. A Flood of Evidence. The authors are Bodie Hodge and Ken Ham. Bodie Hedge and Ken Ham. Thinking about ordering a copy. It's basically 40 reasons why Noah and the Ark still matter. I like that subtitle, so I think it would be interesting for me to read. And if I get a copy and read it, then I might recommend it to you and loan it out to you if you have a similar interest. There are between 300 and 500 Ark stories from around the world. Pretty much every culture everywhere has a flood epic. It is as accepted in ancient history as just about any other thing you can imagine, until you get to the late 1800s, early 1900s, and people begin with Darwinism. And Darwinism challenges the very basis of the idea of a flood and how different land masses came into being, how the earth in different places was formed. And so you have two very widely ranging opinions about the way the world is, speaking about the earth itself. And you go all the way to those who are very biblically based, who believe that much of the earth's topography can be explained by way of the flood. And I think if you spend very much time looking at the Ark Encounter and some of their displays online, then you'll see that they come from that end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum are people who just laugh out of hand at anybody who would believe in such a thing. So lots of room in between, and a million different interpretations in between. But I would encourage you to spend some time with it, if for no other reason, that the New Testament writers take the flood as history. So again, if you cannot trust the New Testament writers to tell you the truth about the flood, at what point do you break camp with them? At what point do you say, well, if they don't have that right, then what do they have right? So things in the Old Testament are important to us as history in themselves, but they're also important to us because New Testament writers hold them to be important. So as we're reading and studying from the New Testament, they refer us back to the Old Testament. There's actually a couple of places where the Hebrew word for ark shows up in this passage, and then in Exodus when they're talking about Moses. When Moses is placed in that little boat and put among the bulrushes on the river, it's called an ark. Same word to describe the little bitty boat where Moses was placed in the river, and the great big humongous boat in which Noah and his family escaped the flood. All right, we're going to skip over where we were last week. We're going to take our minds off the sons of God marrying the daughters of men and move down to chapter 6, verse 5. Chapter 6, verse 5. The only thing I want to take out of the first 5 verses is to remind us that the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with man forever. He is mortal. His days will be 120 years. So kind of keep that at least in the back of your mind. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground, birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, and he's the man that we're going to be talking about predominantly this evening. This is the account of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. The old King James has gopher wood. Make rooms in it, coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. Make a roof for it and finish the ark to within 18 inches of the top. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives along with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you and be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. And Noah did everything just as God had commanded him to do. All right, so we're just going to jump off from there and talk a little bit about Noah. For years, I had the honor of being the song leader for VBS, and that's a whole other different fun thing to do. How many of you remember VBS songs? One of the songs we used to sing was Good Old Noah Built the Ark. It's to the tune of Old MacDonald Had a Farm, right? And so and in that ark he put 2 wallabies, like God told him to, and then with a whatever wallaby says here and a wallaby says there, and you would sing that over and over with a whole bunch of kindergarten and pre-K kids until they had satiated their desire to shout out the names of animals that you could put on the ark. Well, tonight we're going to talk about good old Noah and some of the good things and some of the bad things that Noah had happen in his life. So we start with the difference between Noah and the people around him. Okay? We're described twice that all of the people around Noah are only thinking about evil all the time. A group of people that grieved God so much that he wanted to wipe them out. And not just them, but that he wanted to wipe out all the other things that he had created to be with them. So go all the way back to Adam. God makes Adam out of the dust. He brings to Adam all the animals. Adam names them, right? That entire scenario now is at risk because their descendants are so evil all the time. And then we get to Noah, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And you find out that Noah was a righteous man and was a blameless man among the people of his time. Now, to be righteous, to be upright, to be blameless puts you in some amazing company. Right? When you read the book of Job, right? Job has tons of horrible things happen to him, but whenever Job is introduced, he is a blameless and upright man. Right? A man who fears God and hates evil. So that's his description. Noah is very much like that. Here's a guy in the middle of a generation of horrible people who is God's man, who finds grace not just because God is looking for somebody to save the human race, but because he is a man worthy of God's use at that time. Run over to Jude, almost to the end of the New Testament. Jude, and we're going to read verses 14 through 16. Jude 14 through 16. We've already touched on this passage before. Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about these men. These are men who lived in Jude's day, See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict all the ungodly of all the ungodly acts that they have done in the ungodly way, and of all the harsh words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These men are grumblers, fault finders. They follow their own evil desires. They boast about themselves, and they flatter each other to their own advantage. That's the kind of generation that we're talking about. Jude had people like that he knew. Right? So it's not just in Noah's day and age. There are people in our day and age that I don't know God's mind well enough to speak for him, but I'll say what I think. I think there are people that it repents God that they're alive. Right? There's so much evil in their lives that there's no joy in their creation. Right? But in the time of Noah, there were so many of them that the only answer was to get rid of them. So Noah is surrounded by complete ungodliness. The second thing about Noah is that he was evidently a preacher who had zero responses in over 100 years of preaching. Now, I'm not great, but I'm ahead of Noah, right? It's a long time to be talking to people about changing their ways, and nobody seems to have responded. Look over at 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter chapter 2. And we're going to read verses 4 and 5. If God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them into gloomy dungeons to be held for judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others, if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, etc. So when Peter identifies Noah in the New Testament, he gives him that title, right? He saved Noah, a preacher of righteousness. We don't know exactly what Noah's sermon material might have been. If he was talking to people about the impending flood and saying you need to change before the flood comes, if he was simply saying God is sorry that he ever created us, we're a terrible generation and we need to change our ways and become more godly. We don't know what his sermon material was. We do know that in the beginning when God says build an ark, he says for the saving of your family, and when Noah gets on the ark, it's just his family. Right? So for perhaps 100 years, Noah tries, while he's building the ark, to influence the people around him, and the people around him are never influenced. Let me give you a couple of what ifs. What if Noah had had the kind of response that Jonah had? Right? Jonah didn't want to go. Right? Jonah, God tells him, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against her, for her wickedness has come up before me. And Jonah says, no, I don't believe it will. I think I'll run away. God tracks him down. You know the story. He's swallowed by the big fish, spit out on dry land. He finally goes, and when he goes, his sermon material is, in 40 days, God is going to destroy Nineveh. Nineveh's king, along with every person in Nineveh, they declare a fast. They put on sackcloth and ashes. They cry out to God, and God decides he's not going to destroy the Assyrian Empire. He does not wipe out Nineveh. What if Noah had the kind of results that Jonah had had? Do you think there would have come a time when God said, okay, maybe not. Maybe there's hope for this generation. Maybe we can change our minds and not do it. There's a strange passage in Jonah, chapter 3 and verse 10. God repented from the disaster that he had planned to bring upon the people of Nineveh. It's another one of those really odd things. God decided against the judgment that he had already put in place. What if Noah had somebody listen to his call for repentance? Well, we'll never know, because nobody repented. Nobody changed. What we know is that a full generation of people said no to the Lord, And the Lord finally had to do what the Lord set out to do in the first place. And I guess you could say God keeps his promises. Right? When he tells you that something's going to happen, you better take it to heart and follow through on whatever it is that God is calling you to do. Number 3, good old Noah had to make a choice. Either he was going to be one of the unfaithfuls, or he was going to live out that claim that he was blameless and upright. He was going to live up to his reputation and be the guy who builds the ark and who is saved from the flood. Right? When Peter tells us in 1 Peter that there were 8 souls saved by water, if he's going to be that guy, he has to make a decision about what to do with all those other folks. He can't be righteous Noah and still be in cahoots with all the other folks. He has to separate himself out. So let me read to you Hebrews 11:7. We don't have to turn over there. By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. I'll read that to you again. He condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. At some point, you have to decide whose team you're on. At some point, you have to decide whether you're going to be in cahoots with everybody else or whether you're going to be God's man. And Noah, in the middle of all that preaching, in the middle of all that building, stayed firm in his resolve to just be God's man. And as a result, he and his wife and his 3 sons and their 3 wives are saved from this cataclysm. They are remembered throughout history as being a faithful family. And really, we don't know much about Mrs. Noah or Shamham and Japheth's Mrs. Shamham and Japheth. We know much less about them. But we know that Noah was faithful and his family was saved as a result of that. That would make a good sermon about male spiritual leadership, don't you think? If we wanted to just talk about if you're going to be a real man, you're going to save your family, right? Stay in control, make sure that your family hears the word of God as well. So that's another thought for another time. And a tough one, a tough thought. So here's a pop quiz. How many kinds, or how many of each kind of animal did Noah take on the ark? Chapter 6 says 2 of each kind, right? But there in chapter 7, oddly enough, we get the number 7 several times. So you've got 2 of each of the unclean animals, and you've got 7. It depends. I don't do Hebrew, and the scholars tell me they don't know either. So it's either 7 total or 7 pairs. It may be 1 pair of unclean and 7 pairs of clean, or it may be 1 pair of unclean and 3 pairs plus 1 of the clean. Not sure exactly from the Hebrew which is which. Either way, there's more of the clean animals than there are the unclean animals. What's the problem with that text? We've got no indication anywhere prior to that what a clean animal or an unclean animal is. We're going to get all the way to Mount Sinai before God explains to the children of Israel what a clean animal and an unclean animal is. Then he informs them, oh, by the way, when Noah was on the ark, he had a pair of uncleans and 7 pairs of the cleans. Then the question is, why? Well, prior to the flood, it seems that human beings were not eating flesh, that they were eating what the animals were eating. And I have no great way of illustrating that or giving you lots of evidence, but I believe it's true. Let me go back to chapter 6 and verse 21. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. So at least on the ark, it doesn't seem that they were eating the animals. They certainly weren't eating the unclean animals, right? He had 2 pigs, right? They weren't eating the 2 pigs. They had they had a set of lambs, ever how many lambs there actually were. We don't think that they were eating the lambs while they were eating what the animals were eating. They were eating produce. Can't prove it, don't know for sure, but it's an interesting thought. There's some stuff in Isaiah that kind of points to the idea that humans were vegetarians prior to the sailing of the ark. And if you run over to chapter 9, verse 1, this is after they get off the boat. God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and the dread of you will fall upon all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air, upon every creature that moves along the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, now I give you everything." So just after the flood, he seems to say, well, broccoli was fine, but now you need some steak. So evidently their diet broadens after the ark experience is finished. So again, it seems that we were vegetarians prior to the flood, and that we were, what's the other one? Not vegetarians, meatitarians, carnivores, herbivores, omnivores. There you go. We were omnivores after that. We eat pretty much whatever they put in front of us. Amen? Yes, we do. I'm in favor. Now, there's some stuff that my mama used to put in front of us. I wasn't quite as sure at those points. But we have 7 of the cleans, so those are things that you can eat. And they're also what are useful for sacrifices. You could not sacrifice an unclean animal to the Lord. And we know that as soon as the ark is dry again, when they're able to get off the ark, that they do make sacrifices. So that lineage from which Noah comes, we noticed when we were looking at the genealogies that group of people were calling on the name of the Lord. Let's see. His great-grandfather walked with God and was no more before God took him. Right? So you've got lots and lots of things that point toward a godly group of people. And of course, Noah himself was a blameless and upright guy. But he needs some sacrifice when he gets off of the ark. And he uses some of the clean animals for that. And then maybe my favorite little tidbit, if you ever get in a match of I've lost the word of it. When you trivia, if somebody ever just challenges you trivially as far as the ark is concerned, how old was Noah when the ground was dry again? If you read through all of the dates and the times that are given, all of the dates are given not by January 5th, 6000 BC. It's given by Noah's age. Right? So it's at a certain time in his 600th year, on a certain month and a certain day, that's when he gets closed in the ark. When he gets out, or not when he gets out of the ark, but when he sees that the land around him is dry. They stay in the ark for another couple of months. But when he finds out that the land around him is dry, it is the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year. Happy birthday. The water's gone. It's not going to be long, and maybe you're going to be able to get off of this thing. Let the animals go, and you have completed your journey. So it's all counted by Noah's time, not by earthly time. We don't have any clue exactly what year the flood may have taken place. We don't know exactly how many years before Christ or how many years before Abraham or any of those things. So again, this is kind of the next to the last ancient history reference we have, and then we'll be able to almost put dates, or at least general categories of dates on things. After we talk about the Tower of Babel and we get to Abraham, we know about when Abraham lived, and so it's easier to count backwards to him. So Noah is a man, and the ark is an experience that is, again, extremely difficult to track historically. We have evidences in the earth that scientists can look to and tag and say, here's what happened when the flood was on the earth, and that's why this is the way it is. We have lots of New Testament scriptural references to give us kind of the theology of the thing. God did it, and since he did it, these things are also true. We've got those things. But as far as being able to put a date on it or to put a nice clean circle around it, it's very difficult to do with the account of Noah and the ark. But I would encourage you, we just read through 6, I would encourage you to read all the way in 7 and 8. We're not going to go through all of those things, but Lord willing, next week, we'll take a look in chapter 9 about some of the oddities that happened after the flood when they got off of the boat, and they fell on some difficult times. There were some odd and unhappy things that happened after they got off of the ark as they began the process of repopulating the planet. But again, there's so many stories about the ark, perhaps because all cultures have come down from the ark. Here's what I think happens, and this is strictly a think so. Ever how long it was ago that the ark and the flood took place, everyone who survived it was in one place, right? 8 people. As they began to have children and repopulate the planet, those people stayed predominantly together until the Tower of Babel incident, in which time that languages are changed and people are spread out over the earth. As they begin to spread out, they all know the story. But as centuries go by, they begin to tell the story not from where they were, but from where they are. And so if you have a South American flood epic, it's because the people that eventually settled in South America know the story, but they interpret it in light of their surroundings. The story of Gilgamesh is probably the most popular. It's a Medo-Persian story. It's very similar in some ways to the flood, very different in some ways to the biblical flood story. But they are people who know that it happened. The historical happening of the flood seems to be a worldwide given. But the people of different places have spun the story differently through the centuries, and so you end up with some similarities and a lot of differences, but stories all over the planet about this amazing thing that God did through the life of Noah. So put all that in there and let it swim around a little bit. But again, I would encourage you to read the rest of the epic, read all the way from 6 through 8, and then Lord willing, we'll pick up with chapter 9 next week.